From 12 News, this is Newsmakers.
Our conversations with the candidates for mayor of Providence continues. This week, Gonzalo Cuervo. The Providence native is no stranger to City Hall, having worked for two past administrations, but now Cuervo is asking the voters to send him back to Doran Street. Cuervo is taking on three other Democratic candidates in the primary, including Nirva LaFortune, Brett Smiley, and Michael Solomon. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White, alongside 12 News Politics editor Ted Nesi. Gonzalo Cuervo, Democratic candidate for mayor of Providence. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
60 seconds or less. Why do you want to be mayor?
Providence is an amazing city. People are lining up to live and invest in it. And this is a reality that's causing problems for other folks. It's pricing a lot of families out. It's leaving a lot of people behind who don't have access to the amenities, to the opportunities that other folks find so attractive. I've spent my entire life building coalitions, working with communities, working with organizations to fight for the people of Providence. And I want to bring those experiences, along with my administrative experience in the city and the state, to the mayor's office so that we can ensure that Providence is a thriving city with a great middle class, a dynamic destination, and not just another bedroom community for Boston.
You've talked a lot in your campaign about your experience. You worked for two previous mayors of Providence, so you got to see up close what works and what doesn't in the mayor's office. And I'm curious, what's the biggest mistake you saw them make that you want to avoid if you're elected?
I think the biggest mistake that I saw was times when elected officials did not really take into consideration feedback from the public. And that happened on several times. The closing of the pool on the South Side
I knew you'd say the
Recreation
pool,
Center.
yeah.
You know, that the value of the pool wasn't whether 10 people used it or 100 people used it. The value of the pool was that it was an asset that was available to the community, like a park or any other public asset. And I think that was one mistake. And I think that there have been other mistakes. But I think the most important thing is to learn from that and to understand that governing, no one person has all the solutions. And I think what matters is having the ability to understand that you need to bring people together and get the right people in the room to find the solutions.
I want to talk about crime. The city is certainly safer than it was 3 decades ago, but it is less safe than it was 15 years ago. Homicides were up last year as well. Some other crimes, some violent crimes were down. But regardless of what the stats say, people feel anxious. What would you do about it?
Well, I think people feel very anxious. And, you know, I've been knocking on doors all over the city, and I get that reaction from folks. And I think what we need, there are certain elements of that. I know the police department has been staffing up recently. I believe we're up to like 420 police officers at this point. And
it's 441, but when you take in military leave,
yes,
you know, all that, it hovers a little over 400
yes,
on the street.
And there's a new academy coming on. I mean, I think that one of the challenges that we have is really rebuilding trust between the police force, the community, and city leadership. I think we went through a rather tumultuous time in recent years, and some of that trust was lost. You know, I was part of the team that rolled out community policing in the mid-2000s, and a lot of the success of that wasn't really based on elaborate policies. It was getting officers out of their cars, on the ground, talking to residents, sharing their cell phone numbers, you know, connecting at a very human level. I think that's critical. I think the other thing we need to do is we also need to invest in communities. You know, we need to create alternatives for our youth so that they aren't kind of led down a path to a life of crime.
You know, pivoting back to the police department, though, what about shrinking the department? Look, Gonzalo, a lot of people within your own party and many in the city have beat the defund the police drum. Do you agree or disagree with that?
Well, I think we have a very unique situation in Providence because for the population of Providence, we have an overbuilt city because we're the capital. And so we can't compare, it's comparing apples to oranges when you compare cities by population. I think that the number of police officers that we have and that are recommended by our public safety leaders is a reasonable number. But I also believe that we're not going to hire our way out of crime. You know, it's not like let's hire another 100 police officers and we'll see a significant decline in crime. What we need to do is we need to have responsive, accountable policing. And that's what I hear from folks every day in every neighborhood of the city. People support their police, but they also want to know that when a police officer does something wrong, that person will be held accountable.
I have two other quick questions on this topic. If elected mayor, you would retain, of course, leadership of the police department. Would you want to keep Commissioner Stephen Perry and Colonel Hugh Clements on, or would you move on from their leadership?
Well, Colonel Clements is a fantastic leader of the department. He's been a fantastic leader. He said that he's planning on retiring very soon. He's made this very clear. You know,
Commissioner Perry?
Commissioner Perry, I'm not exactly sure we need the model of commissioner that we have right now. You know, the commissioner plays a very large role in deciding what the police does. And from my perspective, it seems like sometimes he oversteps the role of the chief.
He does as Stephen Perry himself, or do you think the position itself is not needed?
Well, what I think is if you look at the city charter, the position of police commissioner has almost limitless power. And so it really depends on who's in that position.
Well, and David Cicilline was Commissioner of Public Safety when he was mayor.
Yes.
Didn't have that position. Colonel Esserman ran the shop.
Yes, because traditionally that type of position has been more of a political firewall. And I think what we've seen in Commissioner Perry is that he's taken a much more active role in the administration, both of police and obviously of fire.
So you'd get rid of him?
I would consider that, yes.
All right. Let's talk about the Superman building deal. Providence has a lot of skin in the game in the deal that's been proposed in recent weeks with the $5 million grant the city's supposed to give, $10 million in bond money that's for housing that would go toward it, and then a pretty generous, it looks like, tax treaty that's all, none of that's official yet, but that's all in the draft deal. You've expressed some concern about that level exposure for the city toward a project that will mostly wind up building high-end apartments, but you also know this building has sat empty for 9 years, and there was no sign without a deal like this anything was going to happen there. What would your alternative be?
Well, I don't think we need to speak of an entire alternative. I think it's great that the Superman building is being redeveloped. What my concern is, the city less than a year ago approved a $24 million budget, money that we borrowed.
Bond, I think you mean.
A bond. Money that we borrowed at whatever the rate was at the time. I think it was 4%. And a year later, that money, when it was borrowed, they said, we're going to build up 1,400 new units with this money. And a year later, they turn around and they give almost half of that money to somebody at 1% over 40 years. So in addition to the opportunity loss of building those units that we had committed that money to, we're also losing several $100,000 a year on interest payments. You know, that does not sound like a good deal to me. And the other piece is, you know, that $5 million payment. You know, there's been a lot of talk recently about infrastructure things. Our cities are falling, our streets are falling apart, our silos are falling apart. We have an issue with our sewers, where we have 500 miles of sewers that we're responsible for the maintenance. You know, it costs $1,000 a linear foot to replace sewer line. And when we talk about these numbers and we think about that scale, and on the same breath, we're going to give a developer $5 million in cash, that seems unreasonable to me. I think there are other ways to structure that deal.
Like what?
Like having the state step up for more, you know, and having the city structure in a way that the people of Providence get return on this money that they're putting up. Another thing we could do is very simple. Most of the rehab of that building is not going to be major heavy construction. A lot of it is going to be kind of remodeling work, you know, sheetrock, plaster, floors, bathrooms, kitchens, painting. There's a fantastic opportunity for us to really raise the level of MBE participation and WBE participation. Many of these companies are located in Providence. That's a way to keep more of that money locally. There are a lot of different proposals that can make this project a win for everybody and not just a win for downtown.
You've expressed frustration with the state takeover of the Providence public schools. So if you were elected mayor, would you seek to end the state takeover in day one of the Cuervo administration?
Well, I think it would be great if we could end it, but the reality is that that's really in the hands of the legislature. And I know that right now, you know, Senator Zurier has legislation to change the structure. I think the biggest failing of the takeover has been that there was no mechanism for family, parental, and community accountability baked into it. And I think that's a big problem. I think the pandemic, nobody predicted the pandemic shortly after the takeover took place. But the reality is that our students their learning is not improving. And there haven't been major systemic changes. There hasn't, you know, it's been very much the status quo. I'm very hopeful now that Dr. Montañez has been named a permanent superintendent, somebody who has a lot of skin in the game and somebody who's really thoughtful and very caring. But I'd like to see to what extent they let him actually have autonomy to run the school department.
Dan McGowan had a column in the Globe this week pointing out classical still uses an English-only exam in a city where we know so many different languages are spoken, particularly Spanish. Does that need to change?
I think, I think there's an opportunity for them to offer the exam in Spanish and in other languages, but obviously, I think that we have to be careful about relaxing standards for a school that is the one beacon of hope in our district. I think, we should offer the exam in multiple languages, but we should also be focusing a lot of our energy on improving our other high schools that are doing so dismally. Many of our high schools are among the worst in the state, and we have classical, which is this gem, but our other high schools are really suffering.
You mentioned earlier, the condition of the roads. And as I said, you served in 2 administrations. I've interviewed mayor after mayor. We're borrowing money. Now the roads will be fixed up and you'll notice it. We're doing this. We're cracking down the utilities. It seems like the roads in Providence, the city can just never get ahead and have them be in decent condition across large swaths of the city. Can something be done about that, or do Providence residents just need to accept the city's never going to be in a position to have particularly good roads?
No, something can definitely be done. And there are 2 particular things that we can do. Is, first of all, we need to really reevaluate the way that we budget for road maintenance. Currently, our budget for road maintenance is actually less than what we're going to give the people at Superman every year. It's very small. And, to repave roads, it's about $1 million a mile to repave a road. So we really need to change the way that we budget and account for that. The other thing that we need to do is hold our utilities accountable. We have never held our utilities accountable. Every time...
I feel like I've heard mayors say they were cracking down.
Yeah, everybody says they will, and then it kind of falls through the cracks. And what happens
and
is...
what you're talking about, they pave a road, the city paves a road, then
cuts it up.
And then they cut it up to put a water line down or electrical work.
So by law, they're supposed to pave from the center line to the curbing. And what happens is when you only have a keyhole cut, those seams, water gets in the seam, it travels underneath, and that's where potholes come from. And the third piece that we have to do is we have to get much better at actually fixing potholes, because every city in the Northeast has a pothole problem. The difference is that many other cities are fantastic at addressing it quickly. They get to them quickly and they solve them. Whereas here, we kind of let them simmer until they become craters.
All right, we have to go to a break in about a minute here, but I have to ask you about this. What do you think about the property tax proposal made this week by Mayor Elorza? The new property assessments, as you know, came out, and as our Steph Machado has reported, more than half of property owners in the city will see, under this plan, a tax increase.
So I've lived through several revals and revaluation processes. They're very painful, but this one is particularly painful because people are just starting to emerge from the aftermath of the pandemic, where we're hit with the effects of unbelievable inflation. The cost of living has gone up, and the fact that taxes are going to go up practically for many people, particularly owners of multifamily units, is really unacceptable. And I think what would
you do different than Mayor Elorza?
Well, I think the first thing we need to do is guarantee that there's a robust and transparent appeals process, because historically these appeals processes are managed in a way that is counterintuitive and difficult for residents to access. They give you a 10 o'clock meeting a 10 a.m. meeting during the week for people who are working, to go and appeal your assessment. It's a challenge. And the other thing we need to do is we need to really look as a city and as a state on options from getting away from very regressive property tax models. We need to look at other sources of revenue. We need to look at our big institutional nonprofits. We need to look at other sources.
Should Brown University pay more?
I absolutely think. Not only Brown, I think all our nonprofits have an opportunity to pay their fair share, and they should.
The hospitals too?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, that's a whole other half of this program to talk about that. Gonzalo Cuervo, Democratic candidate for Mayor of Providence. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
All right, when we come back, Target 12 investigator Steph Machado will join us. We're going to be talking about those property tax increases. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White, 12 News Politics editor Ted Nesi, and we're joined by Target 12 investigator Steph Machado. Steph, we have you here because Mayor Elorza's final budget address of his 2 terms was this week. You were at City Hall. You covered that. I'm just curious what your big takeaway was from his budget address.
Yeah, so first of all, it was the first time the mayor had made a big speech in the council chamber since before the pandemic.
Oh, right.
He didn't do a State of the City for the last 2 years, and he made his budget addresses virtual. So it was really like a pomp and circumstance, right, that we didn't see in the pandemic. Was very evident, and he sort of made it like a State of the City. He talked about what he had accomplished over the past 7 years. He said he's going to sprint to the finish line over the next few months before his term ends, and he got really emotional at times, you know, making his final speech as mayor.
And we have a bit of a soundbite, I believe, from when he started to get choked up. Why don't we take a listen to that?
The same intensity and dedication to my job over these last 8 months that I brought for the full 7 years.
You know, Mayor of Providence can be a tough job. You have to wonder if those are tears of joy that his 2 terms are coming.
You know, it is a good reminder, and I say this occasionally on the show, that all these people we cover are humans, and that this, he has put a lot of this job, whether you like a politician or not. You almost can't do these jobs without working hard and being emotionally invested in them, and realizing that's over or coming to an end is usually a big deal for them.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but we can't lose sight that this was a budget address,
right.
And we talked a little bit on the first half with Gonzalo Cuervo, who's a candidate to replace Jorge Elorza, about the city's soft evaluation that just came out. So there's the hard evaluation, the soft evaluation, where they kind of look at sales.
Yeah, the statistical one rather than the door knock.
Other than the door knock. This was a soft evaluation, but despite that, as you've been reporting, people are getting sticker shock when they have been seeing their assessments come into their home. And based on the budget address that he gave in his plan, where he would raise the homestead exemption, which is good for people who live in their homes, but that's bad for people who might rent, and landlords will be passing along that increase in taxes.
Exactly. So the balance he tried to make was he cut the tax rate, and he also gave a bigger tax break to people who live in their homes. So if you have a single-family home in Providence, there's about a 50-50 chance you're going to get a higher tax bill versus a lower tax bill. But landlords, the vast majority of landlords, are going to get a higher tax bill. You might think, well, they have plenty of money. Some of them don't even live in Providence. But with all likelihood, many of those are going to pass that on to their renters. So this is definitely going to be a debate over the next several months. The city council is going to have to decide if they want to try and tweak this formula a little bit, maybe to spread out the tax increase more fairly, though that could mean that people who thought they were getting a tax cut now won't get one. But this is definitely going to be a debate we have over the next few months, because the bottom line is this is a tax increase.
And as you two know, I've been working on a story actually going to air Monday night on 12 News about rental prices, particularly in Providence, though all across the state. And when I saw your reporting about what was going to happen to these multifamily taxes, I mean, people across Providence are seeing $400, $500 increases in rents, 20% spikes in their rents. And if taxes are about to go up, are those going to be fed into that, or is that going to be another round? That might only exacerbate the challenges we're seeing in the city.
People who have multifamily homes who are emailing me are telling me that their assessments went up hundreds of thousands of dollars in value. So this isn't like a tiny amount of increase. So even with the tax cut, they're still getting a bigger bill.
The other thing I found interesting, Steph, from the budget that you reported on is, you and I, we've been looking closely at ARPA money, the American Rescue Plan Act funds that went to the state, all the cities and towns, the school district. There's a lot of money out there, as I always say. Keep an eye on where your community is spending it. They made some big tweaks to the mayor's plan for the $100+ million left in Providence. Quite a bit is going into this revenue recovery category, which they can basically do whatever they want once they get it classified as that.
Yeah, the rules are much looser, because this was the whole point of the American Rescue Plan, in part, to help municipalities that lost revenue during the pandemic. So while many of the ARPA dollars are going to specific line items, $37 million is going to revenue recovery, and that just can get put in the budget as basically anything.
Plug holes.
Plug holes. And so, they're putting $25 million of that in this budget that's been proposed, but they're still raising taxes by $14 million to get more revenue. And they want to use that revenue recovery money from ARPA on things like fixing up the hurricane barrier, fixing sidewalks, all important things. But like Ted said, you can really use it on anything you want.
Could they use it on trying to, could the city council look at the balance sheet and use that $25 million or more to take care of the property tax?
If they want, there are creative ways you could. You know, you see governors in other states giving tax cuts, even though that's specifically not allowed. But if you use the money for one thing and there's more left, then you cut over here. So certainly, I would think there is room if city leaders wanted to, but they also have a bunch of things they want to spend money on.
Right, exactly.
All right, I have just another Providence question for you before I do want to get to the 2nd Congressional District, Ted. But Superintendent Javier Montañez testified before the Senate Committee on Education. A state school takeover bill would do a lot of things. This is one by Sam Zurier, right?
Yes, a fairly new Providence senator who was elected in a special election. The bill would create more oversight over the state takeover by creating this new board of trustees that would have the power to approve an extension of the takeover, have the power to approve major hiring.
Can I stop you for a second
Yep.
and just ask a really stupid question for someone who does not cover as closely as you do Providence City Schools? Don't we already have that? And it's called the school board. And if they empowered them, which right now they're just sort of a rubber stamp or not even that, couldn't they play that role?
That is exactly what Mayor Elorza asked the Senate committee to do. He said in his testimony, he said, instead of creating a new board, why don't we give powers back to the school board? So that's potentially an option here, but the state takeover took the powers away from the school board and gave them to Education Commissioner Angelica Infante Green. So right now the school board is really just a sounding board. The power that she has delegated to them is like union grievances, but not major. They're not approving policies. They're not hiring the superintendent. They are not deciding what the budget's going to be.
So why did the superintendent oppose the bill?
He was very passionate and emotional, and he said, I've been in this district for decades as a student, as a teacher, as a principal. We keep coming up with plans to turn around the district, and then we abandon them 2 or 3 years later. We never follow through. So his argument was, why don't we see if this plan, which was a 5-year turnaround, now might be a 7-year turnaround, why don't we do this plan that the community came up with and not tinker with it 2 or 3 years in?
Okay. All right. Like I said, got to pivot to the 2nd Congressional District. Former Cranston Mayor Allen Fung, he announced his candidacy to replace Congressman Jim Langevin. You were at his announcement, Ted. Democrats are clearly taking him very seriously. They launched a website to attack him. And the National Republicans, they feel pretty optimistic.
Yeah, Fung, just before we tape this show, the National Republican Congressional Committee named Fung to their Young Guns program, which has been going on for quite a number of years, and it points out candidates all across the country they think have a shot. And, you know, now Allen Fung is kind of doing the dance that we always see with Republicans in federal races in Rhode Island, which is how do you embrace your party enough to keep Republicans excited and differentiate from the Democrats while holding on to enough independent voters who maybe usually vote for the Democrats to vote for a Republican this time. And we see him starting to try to figure out how he's going to try to do that balance. While, of course, the Democrats, particularly Seth Magaziner's campaign, already trying to turn him into, you know, Donald Trump light, which, of course, the Fung people reject.
Well, let's hear him try and do that balancing act, as you say. He was asked by reporters after his announcement about Kevin McCarthy, who's right now the Republican minority leader in the House, about would Allen Fung vote for him to be the House Speaker if the Republicans took control of the House. Here's what he had to say.
That's what's going to come down the line. We're talking about, you know, months from now. But I support a lot of the Republican leadership's policies and agenda they're putting out. It fits in line with what I'm hoping to do to reduce gas prices, reduce, you know, a lot of the inflation that's really hitting on our pocket.
And you heard his message right there, coming right back around to inflation, inflation, inflation. And that was the core of Allen Fung's speech was, you know, look at what Democratic control in Washington has done to gas prices, to supply shortages, et cetera. And I think, you know, that it's interesting. I've covered a lot of Allen Fung campaigns over my years in Rhode Island. Very different feel when he has kind of some of the political wind at his back here, as opposed to in 2018 when he was running for governor and he was fighting against the Trump backlash, which was much harder. Different feel there. But again, this is still a district that voted for Biden by double digits, so I don't think the Fung campaign's under any illusions about how tough it would be to actually win this race, but they feel like they're doing what they need to do right now to be competitive.
And, you know, the Democrats might come out and say, hey, look, Alan Fung, he's a nice guy. I like him too. But a vote for him is a vote for taking control of the House.
And where have we heard that before?
Republicans.
2006. It's how Sheldon Whitehouse beat Lincoln Chafee, even though on Election Day, Lincoln Chafee, who was then a Republican, had a 60+% approval rating from the voters who were turning him out of office that day. So that has been a message that worked for Democrats around. But 2006 was a great year for Democrats, a Republican backlash year. That's not this year. So it might be harder to get that message across in this environment.
And we should mention with 30 seconds left that Jessica De La Cruz, state senator, dropped out of the race or paused her campaign, I guess is the right way to say it. Bob Lancia is a former state rep. He is still running in that Republican primary. Let me just say, I'm very happy that a man who was 52 years old was labeled a young gun, because I'm a little bit younger than Alan Fung, so that is, I'll take
Not
that.
much.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Ted. Steph Machado, Ted Nesi, thanks so much for joining us, and thank you for watching. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers.